Terminal flower. My supervisor gave me one rule for the overnight shift. Never let the doors of Terminal 4 close behind you, without a wedge in the frame. He never told me why. 3 weeks later, I found out. I was 22 years old and needed the overtime badly enough that the shift running midnight to 8 in a closed airport terminal sounded like an acceptable trade. The night supervisor handed me the master keyring on my first day, walked me through the patrol route, and gave me the one rule with the particular tone people use when they mean it: never let the perimeter doors of Terminal 4 close behind you, without a wedge in the frame. He didn't explain it beyond saying the magnetic locks in the older section were unreliable, which was plausible enough that I filed it under institutional quirks and moved on. I was 22. I needed the money. I was not asking follow-up questions about door closing protocols. Terminal 4 had been shut down for renovations for 8 months. It was a mid-century structure, high vaulted ceilings, miles of faded blue carpet, the particular architectural confidence of an era that believed in space as a statement. The renovation had stalled, and the concourse sat empty rows of abandoned boarding gates, shuttered duty-free shops behind locked glass escalators frozen mid-motion like something caught in the middle of an action it would never complete. The air was stale in the way that large enclosed spaces get stale when human circulation has been removed ozone and old floor wax, and the specific dry metallic smell of dormant machinery. The smell of a place that has been waiting for something that hasn't come back. My patrol required 2 full sweeps of the concourse each shift, flashlight int. The corners of the shuttered shops, padlock checks on the rester, ants, the steady rhythm of steel-toed boots on carpeting that had absorbed 8 months of silence. I got used to it the way you get used to anything you repeat enough. The space became familiar. The sounds became catalogued. I stopped being unsettled by my own reflection in the dark windows and started moving through the terminal with the efficiency of someone who had mapped the geography of a place thoroughly enough to stop thinking about it. The first thing appeared during my 3rd week on a Tuesday at approximately 2:15 a.m. I was passing Gate 42, a dead-end section that jutted toward the active runways, the floor-to-ceiling windows giving onto the black of the tarmac and the distant colored lights of the active parts of the airport. I had walked this route 4 hours earlier at the start of my shift. The abandoned check-in desk at Gate 42 had been empty, then dust-covered foe would counter nothing on it, nothing near it, the same as every other surface in the terminal. When I passed it on the 2nd sweep, my flashlight caught something white in the center of the counter that had not been there before. I stopped. I stood for a moment listening to the terminal around me, the distant hum of the emergency lighting, nothing else. Then I approached the counter. It was a boarding pass. Printed on heavy stuck, no crease is no handling, where the pristine condition of something that has come directly from a machine rather than from a pocket or a bag. The ink was an unusual bruised purple rather than standard black. I shone my light on it. The airline name was one I didn't recognize, which I later confirmed belonged to a carrier that had ceased operations in the late years. The destination was a city I have not been able to identify on any map I've consulted since. The date was that night's date. The boarding time was 3:33 a.m. I checked the floor around the counter for footprints in the dust. There were mine from the first sweep, a clear trail running along the patrol route. There were no others. The air in Terminal 4 was completely still. The ventilation system had been shut down with everything else, and nothing moved in there without leaving a record in the dust. The ticket had been placed on that counter between my 2 sweeps of a locked terminal to which I held the only keys. I put it in my vest pocket and finished the patrol and did not sleep well that morning. Over the following 2 weeks they kept appearing. Tucked in the gap of a locked glass door, resting on the handrail of the stopped escalator, wedged beneath the wiper of a maintenance cart that hadn't moved in months. Everyone pristine, everyone printed in that same bruised purple, everyone listing 3:33 a.m. as the boarding time and the same identifiable destination. I checked the dust systematically. I took photographs of the floor before and after each patrol. My tracks, and only my tracks every time. Whatever was living those tickets was not walking on the carpet. I reported this to the supervisor on duty, describing it as evidence of possible unauthorized access. He listened and told me to keep logging it, and did not look surprised, which I noted, and did not yet know how to interpret. The terminal itself began to change around the same period, or I began to notice changes that may have been present from the beginning. The temperature fluctuated in ways that the passive overnight environment of a sealed building should not produce pockets of cold that appeared and dissipated without air movement, localized enough that I could walk in, one and out of it within 3 steps, the air going from ambient to breath, visible and back. The PA system, which the maintenance technician confirmed, was physically severed from the power grid, showed me the cut wires, explained with professional certainty that those speakers could not produce sound, began emitting something around 3 a.m. each night. Not static. A rhythm? The slow, wet, deliberate pattern of someone breathing close to a microphone, the inhale and exhale clearly differentiated, consistent in interval, continuing until approximately 3:45, before stopping as cleanly as it had started. I sat in the main concourse one night and listened to it for 30 minutes and counted the breaths and found them to be consistent with a resting respiratory rate and a complete absence of the micro variations that characterize actual human breathing, as though it was a recording of breathing rather than breathing itself, or a very precise simulation of what breathing sounds like without the biological irregularity that real respiration always contains. The night in late November I was on the second sweep, 3:15 a.m., the PA system doing its breathing thing, my coffee long gone cold in the cart back at the security station. I turned the corner toward gate 42 and stopped. There was someone sitting in the chairs. The last row of connected seats facing the windows, a figure slumped slightly forward, completely still visible as a sill, yet against the pale wash of the emergency lighting from the corridor behind me. The shape was unambiguous, the posture of a person sitting, head inclined forward, the suggestion of shoulders, the geometry of someone waiting. I felt the specific fear that is not panic, but is the thing underneath panic, the cold settling in. The chest that happens before the body has decided what to do. I called out. My voice went down the concourse and came back, and the figure did not move, did not turn, produced no response to a loud voice in a space where sound carries with unusual clarity. I walked toward it because protocol required investigation, and because some part of me that I was not fully in control of needed to know what I was looking at. At 20 feet I could see it was a sit. A man's sit gray, the cut of a previous decade, arranged in the chair with the kind of precision that implies intention, trouser legs creased, jacket sleeves resting on the arm. Rests in the position, arms rest collar up, as though enclosing a neck. The whole garment oriented toward the windows in the posture of someone who had been sitting there waiting for a long time and had decided to keep waiting. The fabric was filled, not with a body I could see, but with a volume, a resistance, the sit holding its shape against something that the light did not reveal. The smell reached me as I got close, ozone and standing water, old and stagnant. The smell of somewhere that has been sealed and dark for longer than the renovation, longer perhaps than the terminal's operational history. The right sleeve moved, not falling, rising, slowly with the deliberateness of a gesture rather than the randomness of a disturbance. The empty cuff came up and extended, pointing toward the dark glass of the runway windows. I did not look at what it was pointing at. I looked at the window because the window was in front of me and my flashlight beam was on it, and in the black glass I could see the reflection of the room behind me, the chairs, the terminal corridor, the sit in the seat, the empty cuff still raised, and beside the sit visible in the reflection, and not visible when I turned to look directly at the space of face, present only in the glass, looking back at me from somewhere between the reflection and the darkness outside the window. My face, my exact face with my features arranged in it. An expression I was not making, wide-eyed mouth slightly open, the expression not of someone who is afraid but of someone who has been sitting there for a very long time waiting to be found. I ran. The PA system came up as I moved, the breathing replaced by something mechanical and loud that I felt in my chest cavity more than I heard it, and I hit the fire doors and went through it. Terminal 3, and stood in the light and the noise and the presence of other people on the early morning maintenance crew for a long time before I was able to form a complete sentence. I handed in the key ring the next morning. The supervisor took it without asking for an explanation and put it in his drawer and sighed the specific sigh of someone who has received this particular key ring from this particular shift before. I thought about asking him how many times. I didn't. What I think about most is not the sit, not the tickets, not even the face in the window. It is the boarding pass I put in my vest pocket on the first night and carried home and left on my kitchen table. 3:33 a.m., the same destination on every ticket. I have tried to find the city on maps in aviation database, is in historical records of defunct airlines. It does not exist in any record I have been able to access, which means either it is a place that has been removed from official documentation, or it is a place that has not yet been added. I don't know which of those is worse. What I know is that I was finding those tickets every night for 2 weeks, which means I was being invited to a departure for 2 weeks before Terminal 4 decided to show me what it was doing with the passengers who had already accepted. I know that the face in the window was mine, not because I was reflected there. I was standing to the side of the window, at the wrong angle for a direct reflection, but because whatever was looking back had been watching me long enough to know what I looked like and had arranged the reflection accordingly. And I know that the supervisor's rule, the one about the wedge in the door, the one he gave me without explanation on the first day, was not about the magnetic locks. It was about not being sealed inside the terminal at 3:33 a.m. without a guaranteed way out. He knew what happened to people who got locked in during the boarding window. He just couldn't put that in the employee handbook. So he made it a rule about the doors and trusted that whoever needed to understand it eventually would. I understood it eventually. I just needed the wedge more times than I thought I did, and I got lucky that I always remembered it. And I think about the shift workers who came before me, who maybe didn't, and about the gray sit in the chair that had been sitting in that terminal for what the cut and the style suggested was several decades, facing the windows, sleeve raised, pointing at something in the dark outside the glass that I was not there, long enough to see clearly, and about whether the face I saw reflected in the window was mine, because I was almost one of the ones who didn't make it out, or because I am still going to be, and the terminal is simply more patient than I am. I keep the light on at 3:33 a.m. every night without exception. It is a small and probably meaningless precaution, and I do it anyway because the alternative is lying in the dark at that specific time on that specific minute, and finding out whether the boarding pass was ever really for someone else. Flight 815. I found a piece of luggage jammed in the baggage tunnel at 4 a.m. Flight tag on it was dated November 12th, 1974. The bag was ice cold, and something inside it was moving. We called the subterranean baggage facility the dungeon, which was accurate in every sense that mattered. 3 floors below the tarmac, no windows, no natural light, no meaningful distinction between 4 p.m. and 4 a.m. because the fluorescent lights ran at the same sickly yellow hum, regardless of what was happening above ground. The noise was constant enough that you wore industrial ear muffs or you stopped being able to think clearly within an hour. Hydraulic belts, conveyor motors, the percussion of 1,000 bags cycling through a concrete labyrinth that stretched under the entire airport footprint. You went on autopilot down there. Grabbed the bag, read the tag, route it to the corresponding belt. Your brain was not required, and after, while it stopped volunteering, I had been doing this shift for 14 months, and I had stopped finding it strange the way you stop finding anything strange that you repeat often enough. That autopilot was the thing that made me good at the job. It was also the thing that made what happened in the feeder tunnel on that October night take a few extra seconds to register as wrong, because my brain was running a process that had no category for what it was receiving. The storm system had been stacking delays for 6 hours, which meant the backlog on Belt 9, the deep diverter line handling oversized and rerouted luggage, was running behind the rest of the floor. Past 4 a.m., the flow had slowed to the miserable trickle that comes after the initial surge has cleared and you're left with the stragglers, the misdirected, the problem bags that the automated system keeps trying and failing to resolve. I was leaning against a pillar, letting the machinery vibration work on my lower back, when the alarm light above Belt 9 went red and the klaxon started. Jam in the feeder tunnel. I radioed the control station, took my flashlight, and went in. The feeder tunnels are 3 feet wide and 4 feet high metal shits that carry bags down from the upper sorting levels by gravity-assisted conveyor. You crouch walk through them with your flashlight breathing air that tastes of rubber and hot grease, and you find the obstruction and clear it. I had done this dozens of times. 20 yards in, I found the jam, and the wrongness hit me before I had consciously registered the details. A temperature drop that was immediate and localized, 15 degrees at minimum, my breath pluming in the flashlight beam in a tunnel that had never been cold in 14 months of shifts. And the bag that had wedged sideways at the turn was not a bag. It was a trunk, an antique steamer trunk, green leather over a hard frame, brass rivets, oxidized to a dull verdigris, the kind of luggage that belongs in a photograph of a ship's cargo hold circa 1920, and has no business coming down a modern baggage handling system in a major international airport. It was enormous. It filled the shed completely. I squeezed up to it and grabbed the brass handle with my work glove, and the static discharge that came back up my arm was sharp enough to make me gasp and pull away. Not the minor static of dry air and synthetic materials, something with force to it, localized to the handle, gone the moment I released contact. I shone my light on the surface of the trunk. No bar code sticker, no RFID tag, no routing label of any modern kind. A single paper tag tied to the handle with twine that had dried and brittled with age. The ink had oxidized to a rust color but was still legible. Flight number. Date. The date was November 12th, 1974. I radioed control. The line gave me static, and under the static, just at the threshold of audibility, a sound that I have tried many times to assign to interference or equipment noise, and have never managed to do convincingly a scraping rhythmic and deliberate, like fingernails working against the interior of something enclosed, patient and slow. I clipped the radio back to my belt and looked at the trunk and decided that whatever was true about it, the belt needed to be cleared, and I planted my boots against the tunnel wall and pulled the handle with both hands and put everything I had in it. The weight was wrong. Not the weight of a full trunk, not the weight of clothes and personal effects, the resistance of something that did not want to move, that had settled in. The shit with an intention to remain there. The leather finally gave against the metal with a tearing sound, and the trunk broke free, and the conveyor lurched back to life, and I started backing toward the tunnel entrance, because I was done being in that enclosed freezing space with that object. My flashlight swept the wall where the trunk had been wedged, and I stopped moving. The metal of the chute was scored, not scraped the way luggage scrapes when it jams, which leaves surface marks along the direction of travel, but scored vertically deep parallel gouges cut through the paint and int. The aluminum beneath the pattern of something pressed against the interior of the tunnel wall and dragging downward, and in the torn metal, moving slightly in the draft of the restarted belt, were strips of fabric, blue, a specific institutional shade of blue that I recognized immediately and completely because I was wearing it. The same blue as my uniform shirt. Torn strips of it, caught in the gouges in the wall of a tunnel that I had entered wearing that shirt and that had contained a trunk from 1974, and nothing else. I came out of the tunnel faster than I had gone in. The belt was running smoothly, cycling empty. The trunk was not on the carousel. Nothing had come out of the chute. I would have seen it. I was facing the exit when I came out. There was nowhere for it to go except on't the belt and from the belt int the sorting area. I checked the sorting area. I checked the adjacent belts. I went to the security office and pulled the camera footage with the supervisor on duty, and we watched me enter the tunnel, and we watched the belt restart 10 minutes later, and we watched the carousel and the chute exit for the following 30 minutes, and nothing came out. No trunk, no luggage, nothing. The supervisor told me I had been breathing recycled exhaust contaminated air for many consecutive hours and sent me home early, and I did not argue, because arguing would have required me to explain what the footage didn't show, and I didn't have language for that yet. I transferred to the day shift at the ticketing counters the following week. Pay cut, no overtime, differential, fluorescent lights at a normal height above a normal floor in a space with windows and other people, and no machinery loud enough to require ear protection. I took all of it without complaint because the alternative was going back in the dungeon, and I was not going to do that. I convinced myself over the following weeks that the combination of exhaustion and poor air quality had produced a perceptual experience that my memory had subsequently organized into a coherent narrative it didn't actually have in the moment. This is a thing that the mind does with frightening experience, is it imposes order on them retroactively, makes them more legible than they were, and in doing so makes them also easier to disbelieve. I was working on disbelieving it slowly with matter. Its success. 3 months later, I was at the ticketing counter on a slow afternoon when a passenger came up upset about a missing bag. She handed me her claim ticket. I entered the code int. The system and the screen hesitated a full pause, which the system almost never did, and then populated the record. Flight 815. Luggage description, hard shell, green suitcase, oversized. Last scan location, deep diverter tunnel, belt 9. Scan timestamp, 10 minutes ago. I looked at the timestamp and looked at the woman standing across the counter from me, and she was wearing a blue sweater, that specific institutional blue that has a particular shade I have not been able to see since that night without feeling the cold of the tunnel come back in My chest and I stood there with the screen in front of me showing me a bag that had been scanned into a tunnel that I had crawled through. 50 years after its tag said it should have arrived, and I understood something that I have not been able to unfill since. Whatever is in Belt's feeder tunnel did not arrive on a flight in October. It has been there much longer than that, long enough that the airport was built around it or before it or through it. In some way, the architectural record doesn't reflect, and it has been collecting things with patience and consistency for longer than the facility has existed. The scored walls and the fabric and the cold and the static were not evidence of something trying to get out. They were evidence of something processing what it had received, sorting it, routing it. Doing in the dark of a tunnel, no one enters unless the belt jams, exactly what the rest of us do. In the dungeon grab the item, assess it, send it where it needs to go. The difference being that what it is sorting is not luggage, or not only luggage, and the destination it is routing to is not a carousel or a claim area. The tag on the trunk said November 12th, 1974, and the system said the bag was scanned 10 minutes ago, and the woman across the counter was wearing the right color, blue, and her bag was down there, and I could not tell her where it was going because I don't know the destination, and I could not go get it for her because I am not going back int. That tunnel, and I could not explain any of this in terms that the system has a field for. I told her the bag was delayed and gave her a claim form, and watched her walk away through the terminal, and I have thought about her many times since. Whether she ever got it back, whether the system eventually resolved her claim, or whether it stayed in the pending queue. The way things stay pending when the location code points somewhere the routing map doesn't acknowledge. I think about the strips of blue fabric in the tunnel wall, and I think about the fact that they were there before I entered, which means they belonged to someone who came through that tunnel before me on a different night, wearing the same uniform because we all wear the same uniform, and whatever the trunk was doing in there had been doing it long enough to accumulate evidence of previous visits. I was not the first. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as intended. I just don't know who built it or what they intended it to sort, and I have decided that not knowing is the version of this I can survive, and I am going to keep choosing it every time I am tempted to look up the full passenger manifest for Flight 815 and find out whether anyone on it is still listed as missing. The layover. My flight was grounded at 2 a.m. I walked 10 minutes down the concourse to find a vending machine and ended up back where I started. The clock still said 2:14. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that only an unexpected overnight lay overproduces, and it is different from ordinary tiredness in a way that matters. It is the exhaustion of a body that was supposed to be somewhere else by now, that had planned for arrival, and instead got stranded. The fatigue of recycled terminal air and bad vending machine food and fluorescent lighting that runs at the same unvarying intensity at 2 a.m. that it does at 2 p.m., which does something particular to your sense of time and your ability to trust your own perceptions. I want to name that exhaustion clearly before I describe what happened, because it is the explanation I reached for first and kept reaching for throughout the night and kept finding insufficient, and I think being honest about that matters. The blizzard had grounded everything out of Chicago by midnight. By 2 a.m., the airport had undergone the transition that large airports undergo when the last flights have departed and the cleaning crews have finished and the restaurants have pulled their security gates, and the only people left are the stranded ones, a transition from a place that functions as public space int something that merely looks like the infrastructure of mass human movement, sitting empty and humming to itself in the industrial light. I was at gate, a dead-end section of concourse B with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, showing nothing but the blizzard, a whiteout so complete the tarmac had disappeared, and the runway lights were just diffuse glows in the white. I had tried to sleep across 3 connected seats. The armrests prevented it properly, which I suspect is a deliberate design choice, and the ambient noise of the terminal vending machine, compressors, the occasional flicker of a fluorescent tube working through some electrical-ish, kept pulling me back each time I got close. There were perhaps 8 other people at the gate. An older woman, too, rose ahead reading a hard-cover book. A businessman in a wrinkled suit looking out the dark window. A teenager in the corner with headphones on. A few others distributed across the seating area in the configurations people arrange themselves in when they are trying to claim space and privacy in a shared public situation. I sat up around 2:14, checked my phone and found no signal and no Wi-Fi, and looked around the gate area with the specific alertness of someone who has given up on sleep and is now just waiting. I watched the woman with the book because she was in my direct sightline, and because watching something that appears to be doing something is easier than staring at the blizzard or the ceiling. I watched her for a minute. Then, too, she was holding the book at reading height, eyes directed at the page. But she hadn't turned a page. She hadn't shifted her weight. She hadn't blinked, or if she had, I hadn't caught it, and I was watching specifically for it by the second minute. The stillness was wrong in a way I noticed before I had language for why not the stillness of someone absorbed in a text, which has a kind of active quality, a tension of engagement, but the stillness of something that had been arranged into a reading posture and left there, a display rather than an act. I told myself I was tired and my pattern recognition was fearing, which was true, and also not sufficient, and I decided to walk to shake it off. I took my carry-on because I wasn't living it, and I headed down Concourse B toward the central hub, where I thought there might be a vending machine that wasn't directly next to the gate and its 8 unblinking passengers. The concourse was completely silent, my snickers on the terror. As o floor, the only sound, no distant voice, is no luggage wheels, no ambient human noise of any kind. I walked. The concourse was long but not infinite. It 5 minutes at a normal pace should have reached the central hub. I passed a closed Starbucks with the security grate down a shuttered newsstand, a seating area with a specific arrangement of chairs and a discarded coffee cup sitting on top of a trash can in the way people leave cups when they don't want to bother lifting the lid. A minute later, I passed the same Starbucks, the same newsstand, the same chair arrangement, the same coffee cup in the same position on the same trash can. Identical, not similar, the same discarded cup at the same angle, the same chairs, the same security grate with the same slight gap at the lower left corner. I stopped. I turned around and looked at the stretch of concourse behind me. Then I turned forward again. I took out my phone and used the camera to photograph the coffee cup and the chairs and the newsstand, and I walked forward, and 2 minutes later I photographed them again, and the photographs were the same photograph. I called out. My voice did not echo the way sound behaves in a long corridor. It stopped, absorbed, swallowed immediately, as though the space had a different acoustic property than it should have, as though the air was denser or the walls were closer, despite looking the same. I turned around and walked back toward, quickly, not running but close to it, and the overhead lights started flickering with stripping irregularity that made the shadows move in my peripheral vision in ways I was trying not to look at directly. The PA system came on, not in announcement. A voice with the flat synthetic quality of an automated system, reading numbers. 48, 15, 1623-42, repeating in a loop without pause or variation, the same sequence, the same affectals drone. I ran. I came around the last corner and the digital clock above the boarding doors read 2:14, which was what it had read when I left, and I had been walking for what felt like 15 to 20 minutes, and I stood in front of that clock for a moment, and then I looked at the gate area. They had moved. Not their positions. The woman still held the book. The businessman was still oriented toward the window. The teenager was still in the corner, but every chair in the waiting area had been rotated to face the concourse entrance, the direction I was coming from, and every person in every chair was looking directly at me. Completely still. Eyes open wide, the specific glassy quality of eyes that are not tracking movement, but are simply oriented. The woman's mouth was slightly open, and the numbers from the PA system, still running, still looping, were synchronized with movements of her lips so small I might have missed them if I hadn't been looking directly at her face. She was the speaker, or the PA was her, or both statements were equally true, and equally meaningless as an explanation for what I was seeing. I went backward. The businessman stood up, not the way a person stands up, no hand on the arm. Rest, no shift of weight to redistribute. It just a smooth, vertical rise, the joints moving in sequence, but without the compensatory adjustments that bodies make, the kind of movement that is physically correct but lacks the minor inefficiencies that make human movement recognizable as human. He took one step toward me, and the step was deliberate, and the deliberateness was the thing that made me stop thinking and start moving. The jet bridge doors were key, padlocked. I hit them with my shoulder out of pure refusal to accept that this was the end of available options, and they gave way, swinging inward into the dark, freezing metal tunnel, the storm audible now through the thin walls, the howl of it close and real in a way the terminal had stopped filling. The door shut behind me with finality. I felt my way down the sloping floor in the dark, hands on the walls. The metal cold through my palms, and came to the aircraft door at the end, closed and sealed, and I hit it with my fists because there was nothing else left to do. I woke up in my seat. Cabin light, the hum of engines, a flight attendant moving down the aisle collecting cups, the passenger beside me asleep under a thin blanket. We were airborne. The sky outside the window was the pale grey blue of early morning, and the ground below was white, and I was strapped into a seat on a plane I did not remember boarding, and my clothes were damp with the particular cold sweat of fear rather than the warmth of sleep. I sat very still for a while. Then I reached for my water bottle in the seat back pocket, and my hand found something else first. A piece of paper wedged between the safety card and the pocket fabric. A boarding pass, fresh stock, no handling wear. The ink was a bruised purple. The passenger name filled was blank. The destination filled was blank. The boarding time printed at the bottom was 2:14 a.m. I turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper like someone writing quickly and with force, a single sentence. We are still waiting at the gate. I have thought many times about what actually happened during those hours, and I have not arrived at a version that resolves all the evidence into something coherent. The plane was real. The landing was real. The boarding pass in my hand was real in the specific way that physical objects are real: weight, texture, paper grain, ink that transferred faintly to my fingertip when I rubbed it. The 8 people at gate were also real, and whatever they had become by 2:14 a.m. in that terminal, they are, by the logic of what was written on the back of that card, still there, still waiting in a loop that the clock above the boarding doors confirmed had no it through conventional time. I don't know how I got from the jet bridge to that seat. I don't know what the jet bridge was a door into, or what it was a door out of. I don't know whether the plane I woke up on was the flight I had originally been booked on. It's somehow or something else that had the right number and the right seats, and a flight attendant who moved down the aisle in the ordinary way without acknowledging that a passenger had appeared in a seat mid-flight. What I know is this: airports after 2 a.m. are not the same space as airports during the day, and the difference is not only about the absence of people. It is about what moves in to occupy the space that the people vacate, what settles in. The concourses and the gate areas and the long corridors designed for the transit of large numbers of humans, and suddenly running empty. I know that the woman with the book had not blinked for at least 2 minutes before I decided to walk, which means she had already changed before I noticed, and that whatever the loop was, it had already been running when I sat up and checked the clock, and found no signal, and looked around at the other passengers and thought I was simply tired in a place where tired was a reasonable thing to be. I check my seat back pocket now every time I fly. Before takeoff, during boarding, when we land. A habit that has no rational basis, and that I maintain anyway, the way you maintain any practice that protects against something you cannot prove is real, and cannot convince yourself is not. So far, there has been nothing in the pocket that wasn't there before. So far, every clock in every terminal I have passed through has moved in the right direction. So far, the concourses have ended where they are supposed to end, and the people in the gate areas have blinked and shifted and moved with the particular inefficiency of bodies that belong to themselves. So far,